A divinatory technique often overlooked in favor of astrology and tarot, Geomancy, or the art of divination by earth, is a sophisticated and profound method in its own right, and one perfect for those both beginning or looking to expand their divinatory practice. I'm Ike Baker, and this is Arcanum. The term geomancy comes to us from the Greek ge, meaning earth, and mantia, meaning to divine or foretell. The technical method of geomancy, called squilling, is so rudimentary that one can easily imagine it being performed anywhere at any time, perhaps even the earliest days of human development. The earliest records of geomantic divination are in North Africa in the early 9th century, and from there it was absorbed into the Arab world, becoming a fixture of its culture. There are prior mentions of geomancy going back as far as the 4th and 5th centuries CE by Isidore of Seville. However, while Isidore does include geomancy among other methods of mantia, he does not mention any application of the geomantic method. Geomancy as a study of terrestrial energetics, sometimes called ley lines or song lines, or meridians of energy which move through the earth and concentrate in certain areas near the surface, creating vortexes or vortices, similar to the Jinglua meridians and acupoints of Qi in Chinese medicine and Qi theory, goes as far back as writings in the Feng Shui tradition from the period of Emperor Da Yu, 2200 to 2102 BCE. The practice of geomancy in Feng Shui, however, does not necessarily pertain so much to divination per se as it does to finding locations of power on which to erect temples and sacred sites, as well as for means of utilizing this energy for health and healing. With the translation of Arabic geomantic texts into Latin by Gerard of Cremona and Hugh of Santalla in the early 12th century, divinatory geomancy experienced an explosion in the 16th and 17th century European literary and professional divinatory communities. Eventually, geomancy became so common a practice that it had become a part of the mainstream of European society, to the extent that not even the religious powers of the age often interfered with its practice. Some of its most prominent expounders, elaborators, and practitioners of the Middle Ages and Renaissance included Roger Bacon, Bernardus Silvestris, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, Robert Flood, and Albertus Magnus. It was indeed arguably the most popular method of divination for centuries. Underlying geomancy is a profound philosophy of Earth, which conforms to the Platonic idea that the cosmos and the spheres or planets within it possess souls as well as energy. In pre-Enlightenment times, the common view of the Earth and humankind's place in it was more akin to a great and vast organism, a being in and of itself, not merely composed of the individual intelligences to which it is host, but subsuming all these and having its own intelligence, of which the myriad individualized forms were but microcosms. Philosophers of the Renaissance made use of two terms to distinguish these ideas: natura naturata, or nature which is born, and natura naturans, nature which gives birth. Practitioner and author John Michael Greer elaborates, quote, "When the stars and planets assumed certain arrangements, or when the chance patterns of a geomantic divination gave rise to a specific set of figures and their interactions, some part of the great dance of the cosmos was brought into clearer view. All these events formed pages in what scholars and magicians of the Renaissance called the Book of Nature. If Natura Naturata is the Book of Nature, then Natura Naturans is its author." End quote. The Natura Naturans can be correlated to what philosophers of the Renaissance referred to as the anima mundi, or soul of the world. Taking this idea from the Platonic psychikosmou, or soul of the cosmos, philosophers of the Middle Ages and Renaissance elaborated a threefold system inherent to all things: body, spirit, or energy, and soul, or intelligence. Corpus, spiritus, and anima. The anima mundi was the inherent intelligence behind the body of the material earth. It is within this intelligence that patterns of manifestation are shaped, as if on a blueprint, and sent forth as permutations of the terrestrial or classical Empedoclean elements of fire, air, water, and earth. It is the geomancer's purview to use their knowledge of these mechanisms and the art of geomancy, as well as their intuition, to gain meaningful insight and prediction. But how does this mechanism relate to geomancy? Taking what we have previously discussed in our theoretical models given in Episode 5, What is Divination, let's take a look at a geomantic figure to see how the elements manifest to the geomancer in a geomantic reading. A geomantic tetragram, or figure of 4 lines, has a few key components. Firstly, it is a figure composed of 4 lines of binary, either 1 or 2 marks, arranged in vertical order. These combinations yield various figures which imply certain characteristics and meanings to the diviner. The figure is subdivided into 4 elemental or anatomical lines. The head or fire line is at the uppermost, followed sequentially as follows: the neck or air line, the body or water line, and the feet or earth line. It's important to extricate oneself from the modern understanding of elements as strictly material things. To the ancients, when speaking of elements in a divinatory or magical context, their meaning was essential. More broadly, qualities or states of being of which the physical elements themselves are but special or particular examples. This perception transforms our interpretation of purely historical readings of foundational geomantic and other magical and divinatory texts, in that it broadens our idea of how we experience life and material reality. We begin to see the essential qualities which are transcendent of any one particular material nature or instance, and how all created things are but vessels or materia through which these essences or qualities manifest and express. This helps us toward opening up interpretations in a divination, so that they may bear insight and meaning in the context of the querent's question and lived experience. When we talk about spirits, we are indeed talking about entities which have an objective existence, but which take a less tangible form than material beings. These intelligences are guiding or animating forces of patterned activity. The magical philosophy differs from the materialist in that we acknowledge the world as being full of life and not merely dead mechanical matter, on an underlying level. The forces at play in things such as attraction and repulsion, tectonic and volcanic pressures, accumulation and condensation, the beautiful symphonic tapestry of forces that make up the general landscape and atmosphere of a place, have integral relationships which require an underlying law, which must partake of a species of consciousness. Though perhaps less sophisticated or convoluted, depending, as human sentience, it still reveals a relationship that can be accurately identified as awareness. Now, that is not necessarily to reduce the conception of a spirit or intelligence to a merely scientific explanation or poetic analogy, as these do have their own objective existences and awarenesses, but rather to help contextualize the magical worldview in a way that is approachable and accessible to modern Western audiences. The only true way to understand and become acquainted with these disembodied intelligences is to work with them yourself. Taking our model of the macro and microcosms, we observe that all powers and forces without us in the material cosmos are also present in some degree within us, in our spheres of sensation and our psyches. In order that we might connect with spirits, intelligences, and ultimately patterns outside of us, we must first connect with those forces within us. This can be as simple as taking a walk or going outside in nature. That feeling of calmness, quietude, and awe which nature typically inspires is the kind of state one would want to produce before a geomantic reading. We must create a pathway for our intuition to deliver insights and messages from the underlying psyche of the earth, or anima mundi, by way of her specific intelligences and spirits. For its technical method, modern geomancy primarily relies on squilling, which is a term used to denote tapping or poking of an earthy granular substance, typically dirt or sand. This can be done with a stick, pencil, or wand of some kind. I recommend clay as a base or some other kind of hard dirt, as use with sand may prove difficult by not being able to clearly note or count how many dots or taps were made. The process of squilling is a largely intuitive process, as the taps are completely random or broken into segments which are begun and stopped by the inner prompting of the practitioner's intuitive sense of when each particular grouping is finished. This is distinctly felt rather than thought. It's a fantastic method of making first contact with the intuition if we are unfamiliar with its usage, as it provides a small experience rife with potentiality for an intellectual interference to occur. Several questions may intrude upon the process. Am I doing this right? How do I know when I'm done? What am I supposed to be feeling? These are all excellent examples of interference with the process by the intellect. These small, albeit challenging intervals serve as prime examples of how the intellect of the beginning practitioner can cloud the faculty of intuition. Intuition cannot speak if the intellectual mind is talking. This at first seems paradoxical, but that's probably because so many of us have unfortunately navigated the majority of our lives by the intellect, unaware of the myriad faculties and potentialities available to us by other aspects of the psyche or inner self. As the saying goes, kind of, if the only tool you've ever used is a hammer, every problem will look like a nail. We must suspend our intellectual chattering and create a space for the feeling of intuition. It can come as an emotional response, or it can be a deep interior knowing that transcends words. Oftentimes, it's a psychosomatic experience, having a gut feeling about something. This is because the intuition is not confined to the realm of sensorially extractable data. It exists in touch with another level of reality and the self. Therefore, geomancy is a fantastic tool for quieting the mind for a short space. In the practice of geomancy, we also commune with and awaken to greater activity those elemental aspects in ourselves which correspond to Earth. This can be often a very deeply healing and transformative experience. In medieval times, geomancers used wax tablets to squill, and later, during the Renaissance, parchment and ink were found a more practical method. The modern geomancer is free to choose from any of these options, making geomancy arguably the most immediately accessible and practical method of divination of the Western divinatory traditions. Now, let us turn our attention to the 16 tetragrams, or geomantic figures. Consisting of 4 tetra lines of binary, either 1 or 2 marks, the figures of geomancy embody or represent to the mind particular permutations of elemental energy. Geomancy has for centuries also had an intimate relationship with astrology. In fact, it was said that, quote, geomancy is the daughter of astrology. So we will find in our examination of the geomantic figures that there are astrological correspondences and energies to work with as well. After all, the Earth is a participant in the greater planetary dance of our solar system. There are 16 possible configurations of 4 lines of binary. These yield the permutations known as the geomantic figures. Their images, Latin names, which are the most popular or common, and English translations are puer, boy; amicio, loss; albus, white; populus, people; fortuna major, greater fortune; conjunctio, conjunction; puella, girl; ruveus, red; acquisitio, gain; carcer, prison; tristitia, sorrow; laetitia, joy; cauda draconis, tail of the dragon; caput draconis, head of the dragon; fortuna minor, lesser fortune; via, path or way. The attentive student will notice the names and meanings, as well as the forms of the figures themselves, are representative of a binary, that being the polarity which exists in material reality. In short, these are pairs of opposites, both in name and in form. If we take the elemental arrangement of the figures previously discussed and incorporate the idea of polarity to the binary of the figures, we see that each figure expresses or represents an arrangement of either an active or passive elemental permutation. Let's take a look at the figure of Fortuna Major. The head or fire line is even, considered a passive polarity. The neck or air line is again even, so passive. The body or water line is odd, and so is active. The feet or earth line is odd, also active. Each of the figures has a ruling element or inner element indicated by a single dot, the active polarity. All except the figure of Populus, which is comprised of the elements in a completely latent or passive state, and therefore is not expressive of any particular element. The ruling element typifies the elemental pattern that the individual geomantic figure represents or expresses most intensely. These inner or ruling elements assist the geomancer by giving us clues as to the interpretation of the way the reading represents what has or will come into play in the querent's actual circumstances surrounding the question. There is also an outer element associated with each figure. This exemplifies the flow of elemental energies through the 16 figures in traditional sequence, as they were just given. Sometimes it's the same as the inner or ruling element, but in most cases it is different. There are also divisions of the figures into mobile and stable qualities. These are the images associated with each figure, as well as keywords. It's not possible to enter into more elaborate associations regarding the figures in the time constraints of this video, but for fleshing out more detail and nuance of meaning in a divinatory context, I recommend John Michael Greer's Art and Practice of Geomancy, which keywords I've used for the following. Further, each geomantic figure also has related astronomical and astrological qualities associated with it to help further delineate the reading. These include the planets and signs of the zodiac, as well as the nodes of the moon, which are the locations on the northern and southern segments of the ecliptic, the sun's apparent path through the sky, where the moon's orbit intersects. What you will need to perform a geomantic divination and reading. For paper divination, a pen and a piece of blank paper. For earth divination, a squilling device, such as a stick, thin wand, toothpick, etc., and some firm dirt or clay. A piece of paper with a shield chart and/or square chart for purposes of delineating the given reading. Instruction on this will be given later in the video. I have included charts and helpful documents in a link in the show notes below. It should be noted that there are several techniques of geomantic casting of the figures and interpretation. However, the methods given here are the most common practice generally. It should also be said that geomancy is particularly useful concerning questions of a very material nature, such as finance, work, and health-related questions. Generally, any set or subset of questions related to material existence in the physical world and all that implies. First, we must find a non-arbitrary question and formulate it as clearly and specifically as possible. Write it down if that helps. Using your preferred method, generate the basis of your tetragrams, here given as squilling sheet and pen. This must be done randomly. You do not predetermine how many dots you will make. You must stop when you feel as though you should. Some have compared the nature of this to automatic writing. Again, you should not be consciously aware of the number of times you have made a dot. By random dotting, generate 16 root lines, or lines of randomly generated dots of ink on paper with your pen. Take care to do so legibly so that the dots can be easily counted afterward. Next, examine your 16 lines of randomly generated dots and count them. When you arrive at a number of dots per line, find whether it is an even number or an odd number. Even numbers reduce to 2 dots. Odd numbers reduce to 1 dot. This part of the process begins integrating the thinking-feeling function. All divinatory processes should be balanced in this way. The 16 lines of either 1 or 2 dots generate what are called in a geomantic divinatory reading the 4 mothers, that is, the 4 principal or generative figures of the geomantic reading. Record the geomantic figures sequentially into lines of 4 from right to left, and label each line according to our elemental anatomical model given previously. From the mother, we generate the daughters. Move horizontally from right to left once more, and record the first daughter generated by the heads, the second by the necks, the third by the bodies, and the fourth by the feet. These are the 4 daughters. Next, we find the nephews. These are generated by adding the dots of the headline of the first 2 mothers to get either an odd or even number. This number is the head of the first nephew. Add the neckline of the first 2 mothers to generate the neckline of the first nephew. Add the body line of the first 2 mothers for the body line of the first nephew, and the feet line of the first 2 mothers for the feet of the first nephew. We generate nephews 3 and 4 by following the same procedure with the first 2 sets of daughters. At this point, we should have 12 tetragrams, 4 mothers, 4 daughters, and 4 nephews. Add together the first 2 nephews in the same manner as before to generate the right witness, and the second pair of nephews to generate the left witness. Finally, add these 2 witnesses in the same manner to generate the judge. These figures can be drawn out on a piece of paper or placed in the shield chart for organization. From here, we use our understanding of the figures to get a general sense of what the final figure of the judge, basically the outcome or answer, is saying. Any intuitive insights that come through should be noted as well. To further delineate a more nuanced interpretation of the reading and its answer, the geomancer will typically place the tetragrams in one or all of several charts. In our example, we will use a square chart or zodiacal chart. For this, we'll need to consult an elementary manual or table of astrological correspondences and their meanings, unless the geomancer is already familiar with these. The general scheme of applying the figures generated in a geomantic reading to a zodiacal chart is as follows. Figure 1 to the 10th house. Figure 2 to the 1st house. Figure 3 to the 4th house. Figure 4 to the 7th house. Figure 5 to the 11th house. Figure 6 to the 2nd house. Figure 7 to the 5th house. Figure 8 to the 8th house. Figure 9 to the 12th house. Figure 10 to the 3rd house. Figure 11 to the 6th house. Figure 12 to the 9th house. From the placement of these figures containing astrological correspondences within the astrological houses, the geomancer may now examine the matter closely to gain more insight into the minute details of the energies and considerations involved. This also helps cross-train the geomancer in astrological interpretation. A rule of medieval astrologers was that if either Cauda Draconis or Rubeus were to fall in the 1st house, the divination was to be abandoned and started from the beginning at least 2 hours later. This has less to do with medieval superstitions and more to do with deception, either of the diviner by the querent or self-deception pertaining to the querent's preconceptions or whole attitude regarding the question. The next consideration is to determine the nature of the question and the astrological house that most pertains to it. This will be of significance to the reading, and any figure that falls here should be given special consideration. Based on the zodiacal attributions of each figure, note the figure in the 1st house. If it is, say, Puer, then the 1st house is occupied by Aries, and each successive house follows in natural order of the zodiac, despite which figures are subsequently in these houses. When Caput Draconis is in the first house, we could with profit utilize the correspondences from Agrippa's 3 books and find that this figure can alternately be corresponded to Capricorn. The beginning geomancer will profit by doing some independent research and modifying based on their findings and experience. Next, consider the planetary attributions of the figures. Unlike a typical astrological reading, several planets will likely appear in different houses simultaneously. Let these simply communicate the combination of these energies as a divinatory sentence relevant to the goings-on of the real-life circumstances under consideration. Next, examine elemental attributions to see if there's any particular emphasis or imbalance present. Further still, we could apply the accidental dignities to each figure based on relative position in order to bear out further insight regarding which aspects are helping and or hindering the circumstances in regards to the question. Much more on the elements and aspects of astrology will be covered in a future series on astrology. Finally, bring your attention to the 4th house, as this is where in a zodiacal chart the conclusion of the matter is to be gleaned. If after this the practitioner remains unclear about any final answer, they may have recourse to generate the figure known as the Reconciler. This is done by adding by the aforementioned method the first mother and the judge. This will give the most conclusive figure regarding the question under consideration. Record the divination and findings, as well as any pertinent insights gleaned by intuition or otherwise, in your magical journal. Practice will be the most surefire way for the geomancer to become proficient in interpretation. The technical methods can indeed provide us with ways to that point, but only we can come to a personal internal synthesis of how we interpret a divinatory reading. Another vital consideration to be noted is that the practitioner may with profit perform some species of clearing, warding, and invocation rite just prior to the divination session. This can clear the sphere of the practitioner of any possible distractions and or interferences pertaining to the divinatory process and its clear and accurate interpretation. In Invoking, the geomancer calls into the divinatory circle and process the intelligence and spirit relating to the planetary correspondence appropriate to the given question. For this, we will need to consult a reliable chart of the divine names, intelligences, and spirits pertaining to the 7 classical planets of antiquity. For instance, a question about finance would be well suited to Jupiter, whose hierarchy or chain from divine name to planetary spirit would be consulted for invocation. In general invocation, it is best practice to always invoke the highest first, and then down through the hierarchy in order. This is to ensure that we align with and perform our work in the highest possible light and truth. This is a staple of Golden Dawn magical practice, especially when working with the planetary spirits. It's important to understand that the planetary spirits are typically the least stable and therefore potentially the most chaotic aspects of a planetary hierarchy and must only be invoked with and under the governance of its presiding planetary intelligence. In the case of a geomantic reading, the geomancer could also begin with the divine name, archangel, and choir of angels of earth, Adonai Haaretz, Uriel, and the Ashim. This would firmly establish the entire reading under the presidency of the divine hierarchy of Earth, or Kabbalistically, Malkut. The geomancer would then use the hierarchy of the planet selected as most relevant to the question, starting with the angel, and continue downward to the Hebrew name for the mundane planetary body, the intelligence, and finally the spirit. Bearing this in mind, we would consult the sigil or seal of the planetary spirit selected as most relevant to our question, and first, carefully drawing as exact a circle as possible in a clockwise motion, place it within the center of this circle at the top of our piece of paper. This would be done preferably after a short clearing and warding rite, such as the lesser ritual of the pentagram or the setting of the wards given in episode 3. Concentrate for a moment on this sigil, then call forth in order the planetary hierarchy. Here's an example. This forms a link to the forces of the world within, which corresponds to the forces of the world without, and this link must be carefully disconnected and closed off after the divination has been completed. This can be done by giving a license to depart, as again given in episode 3, and retracing the circle you first made in the opposite direction, counterclockwise. Another clearing rite could very easily and effectively be done as well. After the invocation, the geomancer would proceed to the divination, beginning with squilling. Some other methods of generating the figures for a reading include the construction and consecration of a geomantic box, which I have included a link to instruction for in the show notes below. A practitioner could also craft geomantic dice or tiles for figure casting. Geomancy and its figures are an integral part of the Western esoteric traditions and can be utilized in meditations, astral work, all manner of ritual. These will be covered in a future video. For further reading on geomancy for the beginner, my suggestions are John Michael Greer's The Art and Practice of Geomancy, Divination, Magic, and Earth Wisdom of the Renaissance, and Dr. Stephen Skinner's Geomancy in Theory and Practice. If you decide to complete a geomantic reading based on the instructions given in this video, please come back and leave your experience in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to my channel, and remember to turn on all notifications. Please consider contributing to the Arcanvm Patreon for exclusive bonus videos, interviews, and tutorials, and to help me continue to produce more free content like this. Join me again in the next video, where we'll be diving deeper into the historical, theoretical, and practical sides of this and many other related topics. Thanks for watching. In Luke's.